There are a lot of you here. Thank you very much. This is, I'm not going to do any more birthdays. I've decided that 39 is awesome, and I'm just going to plateau here for many years to come. It's nice to be in Massachusetts. One of the reasons that you know you're in Massachusetts, and you guys will all know this because you live here too, is that you can always count on a really excited titter to go through the audience whenever you talk about important liberal economists. So I'm back there, I'm hiding right behind that door while Rachel is talking, and two great things happened. Paul Krugman, that was awesome. And then Joseph Stiglitz, even bigger. But then right after that, the next thing that happened is that there was a little sign on the door that I was standing by a glass door. So I'm standing right inside the glass door, like in a window. And some guy walks by and taps on the door and goes, "Oh yeah, Rachel Maddow's gonna be here." And the girl standing with him says really loud, right at me, "Who's that?" So it seemed like they were on a date, and it was not, not going great. So anyway, I hope he comes in, and I hope that she decides that's still okay. Anyway, I have never written a book before, and I don't know exactly how this goes. Mostly I'm looking forward to taking your questions. So I think that's going to be most of what we do. But if you don't mind, could I read a little bit from the book, and then I'll jabber about it for a second, and then we'll do questions? Any objections? No. Okay, good. The Houbara bustard is not a particularly large or regal bird. It looks a little like what you might get if you bred a common pheasant with an ostrich, like a miniature ostrich with a shorter neck and legs. Or maybe a pheasant on steroids with a stretched neck, sprinter's legs, and a much more impressive wingspan. But the Houbara bustard, this little fella, has recently provided crucial assistance in making America's war in Afghanistan and its spillover in Pakistan the longest-running military hot show in our nation's history. In May 2011, Pakistan got its nose out of joint when U.S. Special Forces sprung a surprise mission on a compound in Abbottabad and offed the most infamous terrorist on the planet, without giving a heads up to the host government. The Pakistani military and intelligence service found itself having to explain how the target, Osama bin Laden, could have been living in tranquility just a few miles down the road from Pakistan's most important military academy, in a neighborhood crawling with current and retired military officers. Was Pakistani intelligence that incompetent, or were they protecting bin Laden? And then they had to explain how a U.S. strike force and its very large helicopters could fly into Abbottabad, spend nearly an hour on the ground, and then leave the country with bin Laden's carcass in tow without being detected, let alone stopped. While President Obama and the rest of America took a celebratory victory lap, the Pakistanis found the entire episode hugely shaming. Not so much on the bin Laden in our backyard count, though. They really fixated on the lack of respect accorded their nation by the United States. Quote, "American troops coming across the border and taking action in one of our towns is not acceptable to the people of Pakistan," said former President Pervez Musharraf the day after the raid. "It is a violation of our sovereignty." The Pakistani parliament called the country's military and intelligence chieftains into a rare and marathon closed-door session where the generals had a spot of trouble in covering their respective lapses, but they did deftly deflect much of the civilian ire. The United States, they reminded everybody, was the real bad guy here. The generals had little trouble encouraging Parliament to formally demand that henceforth the United States would ensure that Pakistan's national interests were fully respected. Ally schmally. The Pakistani people deserved some respect. To add some bite to this declaration of sovereignty, the generals suggested a good first step would be forcing the United States to shut down the secret program that the CIA had been running out of an airbase in a remote corner of Pakistan called Balochistan. Unfortunately, in publicizing their demand that the CIA leave that airbase, the generals also revealed to surprised Pakistani legislators that the CIA had been using that airbase. This was cause for an uproar in Parliament. But the fact that the CIA had been flying armed drones out of that airfield, an airfield known as Shamsi, came as much less of a surprise to the citizens of those areas, of the areas that those drones were targeting, the tribal regions. In North and South Waziristan, the presence of the drones had become a hated fact. Oh, I skipped a bit, sorry. We'll edit that out before we go live with this. The CIA's rather dumpy-looking, high-tech unmanned aircraft had been used mainly for surveillance in the early stages of the war in Afghanistan, but they could also be armed with Hellfire missiles. Very occasionally, from 2004 to 2007, more frequently in 2008, the Bush administration had used drones to launch airborne attacks on suspected terrorists in Pakistan. When the Obama administration took over in 2009, the number of drone attacks spiked. The next year, the 2009 numbers more than doubled. The Obama administration refused as a matter of policy to officially acknowledge the CIA's drone attacks. But in the days following a big get, they announced that some key al-Qaeda or Haqqani network leader was killed, as if the event were an act of providence, or like a rainbow, a remarkable atmospheric happening. These drone attacks became the centerpiece of President Obama's recalibration of America's global war on terror, even if we don't call it that anymore. The Obama administration had no intention of pulling up stakes in Shamsi. Quote, "That base is neither vacated nor being vacated." That was the anonymous but official word from Washington. It was a Mexican standoff in Baluchistan. Here's where the Hubara bustard provided a little wiggle room in what otherwise looked like a very naughty situation. Naughty. Naughty with a K, not naughty with a G. It's not homonym, is it? It's a homonym, it's a homophone? Homophone! That's what, come on, you guys. Here's where the Hubara bustard provided a little wiggle room in what otherwise looked like a very KNOTTY situation. This tiny forgotten strip of land that held the airbase in Shamsi, it turned out, did not actually belong to Pakistan. It had been quietly signed over to the United Arab Emirates 20 years earlier in a show of friendship between the two countries. You see, Baluchistan, aside from being full of spectacular Garden of Eden natural wonders, and it is supposed to be one of the most beautiful places on earth, Baluchistan is among the few wintering grounds of the Hubara bustard, which is a bird held in high esteem among hunters from the United Arab Emirates and from Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Falconry, of course, is the sport of Arab kings, and the poor bustard had long been the preferred prey for falconers. So Emirati royalty were really pleased to have this special foothold in Baluchistan, and right away they built themselves a sizable landing strip for easy access to this surprisingly sought-after corner of the world. The sheikhs tell me it is the ultimate challenge for the falcon. A chieftain in Baluchistan told New Yorker writer Marianne Weaver back around the time the Emiratis built the Shamsi airstrip. The falcon is the fastest bird on earth, and the Hubara bustard is also fast, both on the ground and in the air. It is also a clever, wary bird with a number of tricks. This is my single favorite sentence in the book. Among these tricks, the chieftain continued, is an ability to inkjet a dark green slime violently from its vent. You know what a vent is in a bird, right? Violently from its vent. Its force is so strong that it can spread for 3 feet and can temporarily blind the falcon or glue its feathers together, making it unable to fly. The belief also persisted that the meat of the bustard was an aphrodisiac. Not hard to see why the bustard had been sought and consumed with such sustained effort that the bird was nearly extinct on the Arabian Peninsula. Cold War politics had added degrees of difficulty for the sportsman as well. The fall of the Shah in 1979 made bustard hunting problematic for Sunni Arabs in Shiite Iran, as had a near-constant state of war in Afghanistan. So Baluchistan emerged as the destination spot for latter-day Arab Nimrods. For the last 20 years or so, Emirati sheikhs and Saudi princes and the more general run of ambitious Arab dignitaries had jockeyed for the best allotments in the last good place on earth to hunt the poor bustard. When Pakistan's Foreign Office bestowed upon the Emiratis an allotment that was once held by the Saudis, Saudi Arabia, I kid you not, withheld oil supplies from Pakistan and money for flood relief in angry response. Arab royalty of various stripes show up every year with, according to Weaver's description, pop-up tent cities, hundreds of servants, satellite dishes for better communication, and hunting vehicles tricked out with sophisticated laptops, infrared spotlights, and bustard-seeking radar. It's maybe not sporting, but it is certainly effective. I'm almost done. The Emiratis had made one concession that slightly crimped their style in the bustard hunting department. In the weeks after the 9/11 attacks in 2001, when everybody wanted to pitch in, they had agreed, with the consent of Pakistani President Musharraf, to let the Americans use Shamsi as a base to supply US troops fighting the Taliban just across the border in Afghanistan, and also maybe for a few special and classified operations. In the 10 years that followed, as the CIA and its many private contractors began operating lethal attack drones out of Shamsi, the remote top-secret base remained off-limits to Pakistan's own Air Force. So when the bleep hit the fan, when the slime hit the falcon, in the aftermath of the bin Laden raid, thanks to the Hubara bustard, everybody had an out. The United States could make it plain that the CIA was not vacating Shamsi, and Pakistan could still save face. Pakistani government officials could say, and did, hey, we just checked our land records, and it turns out this little strip of Baluchistan is not, legally speaking, Pakistan-controlled territory after all. See, we gave it to the Emiratis for bustard hunting. So, very sorry, but there's nothing we can do to stop this part of America's secret drone war operating out of Shamsi. But we do condemn it in the strongest possible language. The United Arab Emirates, meanwhile, went on the record saying they had only built the airstrip. Emirati sheikhs and others used it for recreational purposes, they said. What recreation the CIA was pursuing there, the Emiratis said they couldn't say. Shamsi, they assured the world, was never operated or controlled by United Arab Emirates. And so, we still had our drone base in Shamsi, and no skittish ally had to take the blame for having handed it over to us. That's a little bit from the part of the book that is about the post-9/11 era. But the book is not mostly about that time period. The book is mostly about how we got to the political and structural position we were in by the time 9/11 happened. I think that when I decided to write the book, I didn't get a book contract and then pick a topic. I wanted to get off my chest an argument and a laying out of evidence around this issue, and decided that a book was really the only way to do it. And the reason that I wanted to do that is that I think that I was frustrated that a feeling that a lot of Americans had, left, right, and center, about the way things were in the post-9/11 era wasn't explained entirely by post-9/11 politics. Things moved too fast after 9/11 for us to have structurally reorganized ourselves in a way that made it possible for us to wage decade-long wars with civilians not much noticing them. Something happened before that so that we were poised to wage war in a way after 9/11 that didn't much feel like the country was going to war. It felt like we were a country that was sending its military to war. And most of those changes, I think, happened in the modern era. And most of those changes happened after the immediate aftermath of Vietnam. So I'm not an expert on war. I am not an expert on the military. My gig is politics. And this is really about the politics of making war and of ending wars in the United States. And it starts with Vietnam because the consternation over Vietnam led to a real multi-front effort to make sure that we didn't end up in that kind of mess again. The Congress passed a War Powers Act, which reasserted that presidents can't just take us into big wars on their own say-so. Congress having sole constitutional authority to declare war means that Congress doesn't have to just get told what the president is doing. Congress actually has to be asked. They're the ones who are responsible for it. Not just through the War Powers Act, though, but through a sort of newfound muscularity on the part of Congress on these issues. The post-Vietnam era was characterized in national security politics by Congress really making decisions. At one point, one of the things I talk about in the book was when President Ford wanted essentially to go start the Vietnam War again. I mean, I don't think he thought of it in those terms, but he did want us to re-engage. And Congress said no in very uncertain terms, in not uncertain terms. Republicans and Democrats not only said no, but they said no in a way that they backed up by withholding appropriations. So even if Gerald Ford thought that he had the authority to do it, he couldn't get any money out of Congress to do it because they said no. And that sort of attitude of Congress was, I think, part of how we felt as a country after Vietnam. The powers of the presidency in that era, I think, were confronted, if not changed. But the way that we make decisions on this as a country is a matter of balance. I think maybe the most interesting thing that the post-Vietnam era brought us in terms of structural changes on these things was something called the Abrams Doctrine. Creighton Abrams was in charge of the Army at the end of Vietnam, and he died very shortly after the end of the Vietnam War. But before he died, he restructured the armed forces in a way that made it impossible to have any major military operation by the United States Armed Forces that did not also involve the Guard and Reserves. And the reason that was important is because the Guard and Reserves had, and this is a generalization, but it's the way that it was seen at the time, had largely been a way to avoid serving in Vietnam at the time of that war. And so you look at the proportion of Guard and Reserve forces who fought in Vietnam, and we had so many people there, and it's very, very low. And that was on purpose. When LBJ was considering how he was going to staff up his forces in Vietnam, he did not want the country to much notice that we were fighting this war. LBJ did not like this war. He had campaigned saying, I don't want to send American boys thousands of miles around the world to fight a fight that Asian boys ought to be fighting for themselves. He did not want to be a Vietnam War president. But yet he became convinced that we needed to send a lot of people, and so he decided that he would not activate the Guard and Reserves, because those tended to be the sons of well-connected people, and he did not want to be hearing from well-connected constituents about why their son was going to fight a war that he didn't particularly want to defend. He instead thought, well, if I expand the draft, then nobody will really notice. And you can see him making the calculation. I mean, all the LBJ tapes are so great, right? We've got all this audio of him, not only making decisions about whether or not to call up the Guard and Reserves, but also we've got audio of like LBJ ordering pants from the White House. I love that everything was on tape. It's so much fun, and now you don't even have to go to the library. You can listen to it all online. But we've got the evidence of LBJ making that calculation. Listen, I don't want to have to defend this. I don't want to have to make this argument. I don't even have a good argument to make for this. I'm convinced we need to do it, but I can't convince anyone else. I'll call up the draft. And that will mean we'll take a sprinkling of people from all over the country, people who don't have the wherewithal or the desire to get out of it. We will take people who are more hapless and less powerful. We will leave the Guard and Reserves at home to avoid upset. It's interesting to think about that in context of the way we think about the draft now. So often when I've been talking to people about the book, I get this visceral reaction. If we brought back the draft, everything would be better. Well, if we brought back the draft, things would be different. But there is no magic wand. There's no magic bullet, maybe. The overall idea of us being a country that goes to war, of us being a peaceable nation, that doesn't give one person, doesn't give a president the ability to start a war, but puts it in the hands of this clangorous, calamitous, unwieldy body that is our legislature, that was on purpose. And it's structured that way in our Constitution because the founders thought if you gave the president the power to start wars, we'd have more wars. And if you gave the Congress power to start wars, we'd have fewer wars. And they wanted America to have fewer wars. And I think there's a good debate to be had about whether or not, the 1700s were so different than the 2000s that we should reject their advice. I don't think of the 18th century as a particularly peaceable time. I don't think that advice has worn out. Some people do, but I think if we were willing to have that fight right now, we were willing to have a good debate over that as a country, I think that the American people would broadly come down on the side that the founders knew what they were talking about. So, there's a lot in here about Reagan. It starts in Vietnam. The Abrams Doctrine, I'm absolutely intellectually fascinated by. One of the things that I'd be happy to talk about tonight, if you want to, is the role of a politician named Richard Cheney. Through this, the book is dedicated to Dick Cheney because I can't think of anything else I can offer him that might convince him to consent to an interview with me. But you know, he's had a really key role in a lot of the things that I think have changed in our country on this subject. The Abrams Doctrine that I'm so in love with, when he was Secretary of Defense, he was part of pioneering essentially the anti-Abrams Doctrine. This idea that not only do we not want civilian life to be radically disrupted, so that the whole country is paying attention and the whole country is discomfited by what we need to go through to get to war. Not only do we not want that, we want to be able to flesh out the number of people that are deploying to any military operation with people who are not even US military personnel, with people who are working for private companies. I think of that as the anti-Abrams Doctrine. I think it had that sort of effect, that when contractors fill out the ranks of the deployed, we not only don't know what we're paying for their services, we don't know what the lines of accountability are when they misbehave. And we also don't know when they are hurt or killed. The companies they work for are under no obligation to disclose those people to us as casualties. It's all part of insulating us from understanding what the true cost of war is. On the big KNOTTY issue of executive power, I think there's also a good debate to have. That's probably the most important, I think, idea in the book, is that presidents aren't supposed to wage war on their own. It's supposed to be the Congress that makes the decision, and a nice byproduct of the Congress making the decision is that the debate is out loud in a way, and engages the public necessarily. It also makes you have a better debate because you actually have to win the argument. I think that the expansion of presidential power that we think of as so characteristic of the post-9/11 era and the George W. Bush administration, the vice presidency of Dick Cheney, and its continuation into the Obama-Biden administration, I think that has its roots in a lot of ways in the Iran-Contra Scandal. Ronald Reagan wanted to fight a war, wanted to engage in activity in Central America that the Congress said, we understand you want to do this, we say no, we're passing a law to make it illegal for you to do it. And he did it anyway, and he got caught, nailed. And it looked like it was going to be the end of the Reagan presidency. I mean, there were really high-level indictments, people went to jail, it was a big deal. And trying to save Reagan's butt, at the end of Iran-Contra, his administration cooked up this utterly cockamamie idea, which was, you know how Nixon had said, well, if the president does it, it's not illegal? And everybody laughed. What they came up with for Reagan was, if the president does it and it's vaguely related to national security, then it's not illegal. And I honestly believe that it was just cooked up as an ad hoc thing to try to save Reagan. But there are ways that these things survive, and that became precedent. That became not just a weird, outlier, bizarre legal theory to try to save a president in trouble. It became a template for a new idea of the presidency. It has not existed for that long, and it was a cockamamie idea. And I do think that we can dial it back. We think of presidential power as something that expands and has no means of contracting. It can contract. Presidential power contracted after Vietnam because the Congress insisted. The Congress could insist again. We have no faith in Congress's ability to do anything, but low expectations are their own reward. And I think raising our expectations in this case is warranted and not impossible. So, and there's that stuff about the bird. And nuclear weapons grow fungus if you leave them sitting around for too long. So, I will just say two things before we start questions, and both, I guess, about me being nervous to be here. And one is that I am very heartened that you are all here on a Sunday afternoon to hear this. This is not a partisan book about, oh, you know, this guy disagrees with me, and he disagrees with you too, and look at all the ways he's a jerk. This book has no partisan reward. It has no left-right Punch and Judy show satisfaction. It's a book about the politics of waging war. It's about the military. And to have you guys all at least consider reading it and here to hear about it, is really heartening to me. This is not candy. So thank you for being interested enough to be here. Thank you. The only other thing I would say is that it is a little bit weird that you're out here on a Sunday afternoon here to talk about the military. But what that means is you should probably meet somebody before you leave. Because if you think about it, like, you guys are a little bit weird. Like, you like me, and you like the military enough to be here, and you like books. And you live within driving distance or commuting distance of here, so you might find people you like here. So maybe say hello to somebody that you don't know before you leave. And if you end up, dating or whatever, send a note, and I'll be happy. So, all right, so that's it. That's all I have to say. I'm really happy to take your questions if there are any, and otherwise we'll go home. Hello.
Hi, Ms. Maddow. So, big fan of your show, as everyone here is, and everything else. So, you mentioned nuclear weapons grow fungus, but isn't, in all this debate about Congress versus the president, like, I'm just amateur history person, but that once the button and nuclear war with Russia and all, that's why things had to shift to the president versus Congress, because things can't be debated in Congress. We might have to bomb them in an hour. And so, is there a way around all that?
Thank you for the question. It's it's an interesting and complicated idea, but I am not of the belief that the technology of warfare has changed the politics of warfare that much. Whether it's drone warfare in the very current, in very contemporary politics, or the advent of atomic politics and the bomb. The founders, in the way they debated things like whether we ought to have a standing army, and what commander-in-chief power meant, and why the legislature would be vested with questions of war and peace. They were cognizant of the idea that a president needed some authority, some limited, essentially unilateral, but temporary authority to do things like, they would use words like to repel invasion. And I do think, when I say that it's a balance, I do recognize that the president has a very, very important role in deciding what the nation's national security needs are and how to meet them. And there will be, I think there's a reason to make room for some limited action by the president acting alone in cases where speed is of the essence. I think that's true, but I don't think that materially changes the overall idea that an American war should be started on the basis of a congressional decision rather than one man's decision. But thank you. Yeah.
I'm interested in the kind of research you got on the military-industrial complex, going back to Eisenhower's farewell speech and warning about it. And specifically, perhaps you use the Carlyle Group as an example of what's happened and who controls that and who benefits from an era of ongoing, continuing wars. I think that it's naive to expect that the armaments business, the very, very profitable armaments business, does not pursue its own interests. And when you make a lot of money, that makes you more powerful, which means you're able to lobby for and otherwise steer people toward doing more of what makes you money. And that's true in the armaments business as much as it is true anywhere else. And I think that Eisenhower's warning is rightly recognized as being prescient and accurate. I also think, though, that part of the reason I called the book Drift is because I wanted to sort of constantly reassert my own belief here that there isn't a conspiracy at work that is driving us toward the situation that I think we're in, that I have such problems with. I think that sometimes, I said the other night, and it came out more eloquently than I expected it to, like I actually said it wrong and the accident sounded good, so I'm gonna keep saying it now, which is that conspiracy is sometimes easier than complexity. And I feel like the decisions that we made, which was privatization, some of the decisions that we made that I write about, privatization, the expansion of executive power, the Congress sort of given up their constitutional prerogative on these issues, the never-ending expansion of even totally useless forms of our national security infrastructure, like the massive hair-trigger nuclear weapons net that we've got. These are things that we have done, I don't think because somebody was trying to pervert us away from what was right for the country. I think that these decisions were mostly made by politicians who were acting to get around reasonable impediments to things they thought were right for the country. So I think Reagan really thought that we needed to be funding and arming the Contras. And when he couldn't convince the American people of it, and he couldn't convince Congress of it, he figured out ways to do what he thought was right for the country around those impediments. And I think it was wrong. But I don't think that he was doing it because he was trying to break the back of our constitutional dependence on Congress as the decision maker on war and peace. Same thing with the radical expansion of privatization during the Clinton-Gore administration. I don't think they were doing that because they wanted to make Halliburton rich. I think they were doing that because they thought it was a good idea. It was not a good idea. So I really enjoy conspiracy theories, the idea that we are being subverted for somebody else's goals in a way that blind us to what our own goals ought to be. And I not only enjoy conspiracy theories, I believe in some of them, mostly for fun. But I don't believe it in this case. I think that these were rational political decisions made by rational political actors, some of whom I agree with, some of whom I don't agree with, but we got rid of what we needed to keep us moored to our constitutional foundations without debating them well enough. Long answer to a smart, short question. Sorry, go ahead.
Hello. I just want you to know you're my conservative mother's favorite liberal. She
Oh,
says
very
that you're
good.
adorable. Yes.
Please tell her I said hello.
I will. So my question is, I love the book, and I was wondering if, especially in the discussion of the Reagan administration, if there's sort of an implicit critique of the haste with which our executives recently have decided that things are worth going to war over.
Haste is both the speed with which we must use force and the target against which we must use force and the way in which we have to do it to most efficaciously achieve our national aims are all the sorts of things that get fought over when you have a good debate. And if we are now making war in a way that elides debate, we end up with making war faster than we need to against targets smaller than we need to in ways more interventionist than we need to, I think. I think that the part of the reason that you want there to be a big, loud debate involving a lot of people before you use military force, it's not just to slow it down for the sake of slowing it down. It's so that bad arguments get beaten in combat. It's so that bad arguments and weak points in the argument get ferreted out and smarter ways of doing it prevail. And I think that as we have gotten away from the idea that debate is helpful toward the idea that debate is hurtful and that we all ought to just fall in line with whatever we're going to do on national security, our arguments have correspondingly gotten suckier. Hello.
Hello. First of all, I want to thank you and the departed Keith Olbermann for having the courage to speak up under a different administration when it was not easy and very dangerous to do so.
Keith deserves more credit for that than I do, but thank you.
Well,
That's very nice of you to say that.
I'll agree with you on there too, but you get credit too. So here's what drives me nuts, and you spoke to this when you said you still think that maybe the founders had make some sense today, is that this country, when you talk about national security, and therefore I'm going to say it wrong, you get rid of all the rights in the Constitution because national security allows you to do that. Does nobody remember the War of 1812 when the British burned the White House and when this nation really could have disappeared? And look at that time and say, that was a real time of national security and we didn't wipe out all these things? It drives me crazy. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you could also say naughty and naughty.
Yeah, I mean, it actually goes to the point made by the previous questioner, I think, which is that if you get to just assert what it is that we're doing and why you think it's what we ought to be doing, and nobody else gets a say in it, if Congress is debating it as a matter of form and not a matter of function, then you end up getting to assert all sorts of, forgive me, batshit stuff. You get to start asserting that we need to do X or we're going to lose A through Z. And We ought to be able to fight these things out. National security ought not be separate from the process by which we make decisions as a country. And the process by which we make decisions as a country, the whole idea of the way our government is structured, is that we get to say, we the people, we get to say, we get to elect people, they are accountable to us in relatively short terms of office. We make our positions clear both through our elections and the way that we communicate with our representatives, and our representatives then make decisions based not only on what they think is right for the country, but on what we want. And national security is the sort of thing that we've decided that it's somehow untoward or maybe even unpatriotic to debate about it, to fight about it, to have political, even partisan discussions about it. And in that way, we've given not just the Pentagon, but also in many ways the intelligence community, sort of a pass at having to win the argument, about having to justify themselves. The Pentagon has not been audited in more than 30 years. I mean, we spend more on our military, we spend roughly the same amount on our military as the rest of the world spends on their militaries combined. You look at the discretionary spending of the United States government, and it's like, you know, there's the pie chart, and like the piece of pie that goes to the Pentagon is like the one that Shrek would take. Like, it's a significant portion of what we do as a nation, and yet it's sort of off limits. The defense budget can't go down, right? The Pentagon can't be audited. The two fights going on right now between Congress and the Pentagon are that Congress is demanding that the Pentagon take a whole bunch of new Abrams tanks, my buddy Abrams, right? Abrams tanks that the Pentagon does not want, does not have a place to put, does not have any desire for, and would prefer not to have, thank you. And Congress is insisting that the Pentagon take them. What else in government works that way? The other fight that's happening right now is with the member of Congress, the Republican member of Congress who's written the Republican House budget, a Wisconsin congressman named Paul Ryan, who is... The air is coming out of your tires. Somebody's losing. And Paul Ryan's budget is obviously is very draconian in terms of the cuts that it's got, but it does not cut defense. And when asked why it doesn't cut defense, particularly because the Pentagon has just asked for a budget that would imply some cuts, he said, "I don't believe the generals." I don't believe that is actually what the generals want. Yeah, he actually, and so the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, responded by saying, like, essentially, don't call us liars. I stand by my testimony. And I have not seen this myself, but somebody told me today that Paul Ryan has now said that he misspoke and he's sorry. But the basis of that fight is that they are insisting, this is the House Republican Conference, which is all about cutting, right? Austerity, right? They are insisting that the Pentagon take more money than the Pentagon wants. This is not a normal political process, and it's no favor to the military to excuse it from normal political debate.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming out. I wanted to let you know that I truly enjoy your show for its eloquence, humor, and openness. And even when I miss the 9 o'clock show, I'm sure to see it at midnight, and maybe that's why I'm running late to work the next day, but I do enjoy it. I apologize for taking a step back. My questions are a little bit more general and do not pertain to the book. But I wanted to understand a little bit about the things that have motivated you to your point right now. And is there a piece of advice that you would want to give the Rachel Maddow of maybe yesterday or 5 years ago or 20 years ago? And my second question was, I really was surprised a couple weeks ago, I guess right before St. Patrick's Day, you had a cocktail hour and you had an Ardbeg, and Ardbegs are my favorite, and I was just wondering what type of scotch you drink.
Well, now I am old, and so I have a new rule, which is no spirits on school nights, which is the saddest thing on earth. So that just means there's less of everything. But I do love a peaty scotch, I will say. I'm an Ardbeg pal. That's embarrassing. What's that? Happy to hear it? Yeah. In terms of advice to my younger self, I mean, again, like, I think it's because it's my birthday, I'm kind of fixated on being old. So, like, seriously, my advice is like, floss. Which is not probably wise. You know, I am not a reflective person, and I'm not that smart about myself. So I don't know that I've got advice for younger me. I might get really depressed if I start thinking about it. But I will say, you know, that the things that I learned about having been a college-aged person, I think I mostly learned after I was college-aged. And the advice that I would have given, I think that the advice that I would give to college students broadly are that interdisciplinariness is overrated, that liberal arts education is not technical training, that if you are going to be doing something that involves a high level of academic-based skill, you are going to be learning that on the job or in grad school. You are not going to be learning that in your BA. And at the BA level, what you ought to be doing is getting really, really good at thinking very hard and learning the rules of evidence. And if you're going to be a person who's going to make a living by flapping your lips like I do, you have to learn how to make a good argument, and you have to learn about textual reference and do whatever is going to be most rigorous in doing that, whether it's, you know, philosophy or history or hard science or any other thing like that. I would also say that the thing that I think that people focus on a lot in college, which isn't worth as much as people think it is, well, two things. If you want to be in the media, don't major in communications. Like, really, major in history. Like, major in political science, major in math, do something else. Communications as a academic training is interesting for all sorts of fields except broadcasting, whereupon it's totally not relevant. Literally, like, be an engineer, you'll be better off. The other thing, though, is that I don't think it's worth spending a lot of time in college trying to be a really awesome girlfriend or boyfriend. It's like your romantic relationships while you are in college may, in fact, start some sort of trajectory that continues into your adult life. It's possible that is going to happen, and for a rare person, it does. But if you end up focusing on your romantic life in your undergraduate lifestyle, you will give up the opportunity to become a more interesting person because you're spending all the time thinking about dating. And, like, go on dates, sleep around, do whatever you're gonna do, but focus on becoming the most interesting person that you can be. Being good at what you're gonna do, and being really smart, and being well-rounded, and having had a lot of good experiences, because that is what's going to make you a good date in the long run. That is what's going to make you actually worth marrying, or whatever. And that is, and if you spend all your time, like, you know, MASH notes or whatever, and I guilty, that's time I wish I could get back. Does that sound awful? Anyway, sorry.
Hi there.
Hello.
Haven't had a chance to read your book yet because I just got it, but my question to you is about your ability to provide a measured response to all of the loonies out there, the racist, misogynist, economic morons, for a lack of a better word. And you can see that I begin to rant when I think about them. And I wonder what's your secret, because your way of approaching it is much more effective than mine.
Great question. Two things. One is that I think because so many people think I'm a loony and a moron, I am empathetic toward people who are viewed that way. You should see my hate mail, really. Looniness is in the eye of the beholder. So every time I realize somebody's doing that about me. So that's part of it. The other thing, though, is that I feel like most of what I do when I talk about politics on television in particular is I am discussing or explaining or talking with other people who are engaged in American politics. And so, it's very often people who have totally opposite ideological views from me that may be operating, as far as I can tell, from a completely different and false set of facts. And that can be annoying, but honestly, there are a lot more people in the United States who don't care about politics at all than there are people who care about politics and have very different views than me. And I actually feel like, you know what, I recognize a common species in somebody who cares a lot about politics and wants to argue about it, or wants to make a living in politics, or wants to be a public servant, even if that person has totally different views than me. The fact that they care about politics enough to be so wrong is something that I have a feeling for. And I actually have more in common, I think, with somebody who's wrong and nevertheless an enthusiast of politics than with somebody who doesn't care. So that's how I connect. Thank you.
Hi, I haven't read the book yet either because I just got it, but I did want to ask a question about the show. But before that, I did that, wanted to say that you're not that old. Those of us who remember the Vietnam period and had to work their way through that were strengthened by I.F. Stone. And people as old as I. And I really want to thank you for taking up that style, that methodology of stitching together those disparate pieces of news and information that are in plain view and making sense out of it, and doing that every night. I can't believe it. So. And now the question is, I watched this show where you went to Mexico, and I'm trying to figure out to cover the story about loose nukes. And again, you pieced together a lot of wonderful history and all of this other stuff. My question is, how did you get to do that? I mean, and similar shows. I mean, what is it in your methodology that gets you embedded in, excuse me for using that term, but in behind the scenes that way?
That's an astute question, because that's a rare thing. And what you said about finding things that are in disparate places but are in plain view is, I think, a really underappreciated part of what most of us, I think, at cable news do, but particularly what I do, the way that we approach it. That I'm not an access journalist. I'm not getting fed leaks, and I'm not on the bus with the candidates, and I'm not. I mean, I will follow stories where they lead, and I will talk to people off the record when I need to, but mostly I am collecting information that is known and trying to make sense of it. I'm trying to sort of explain what's going on in the world. And so it's very rare that the way that I will be able to bring a story to the forefront is because I have secret information, because I have information that nobody else has. And that Mexico story is one of those rare cases where I got that. And honestly, the Department of Energy, if you don't know what we're talking about here, since it's just you and me, hey, look, who are you guys? The National Nuclear Security Administration is part of the Department of Energy. Their remit, in part, is traveling around the world to where there is highly enriched uranium nobody's using, or plutonium, or something else that could be used to make either a dirty bomb or conceivably a nuclear weapon. And to lock that stuff up, to find vulnerable nuclear material around the world and make it not vulnerable. And so I had covered this because I really do worry about loose nukes. That whole smoking gun might be a mushroom cloud thing that was used to scare us into going into the Iraq War. The Iraq War had nothing to do with that, but I am actually scared by what they threatened us with there. And I think about it all the time. And because I'm interested in that, I had covered with some like slightly nerdy level of detail other missions that the NNSA had undertaken as part of this lock-up loose nuke stuff. And because of that, the Department of Energy decided that they liked me because I was covering this thing that they were doing that they felt was underappreciated. And so it's a little uncomfortable for me because I don't really want to be there as a favor to anybody, but the way that it works is that sometimes you get invited to go see something. And so you get to meet with a policymaker, or you get embedded with the 82nd Airborne, or you get to go to the Department of Energy. And I think that this administration is pretty good at not only picking people with whom they agree to get information, but certainly I think that was part of it with the Department of Energy. That's part of why I got to go. Now, that said, I would never accept any restriction that I could not cover something that I saw that I didn't like. You know, they're not telling me what to ask or what to say. But having an interest in weird stuff that nobody else is covering tends to get the attention of those people that do that weird stuff. So that's how that happened. Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry to interrupt. We're just running a little bit low on time, so we'll have time for maybe just one or two final questions. Thank you.
I'll try to be more quick. I'm sorry.
I wanted to take the opportunity, number one, to wish you a happy birthday again, and thank you for spending your birthday with us. Sure. I hope you get to celebrate more later. My question is about the expansion of executive power. I haven't read the book, so if you talk about this in the book, I apologize. But it seems to me that by talking about how there's an expansion of executive power and Congress, it almost sounds like Congress is sort of given a free ride, almost, but they're still the appropriating body. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a push me, pull you. That, you know, somebody's going to make decisions about national security, and it's Congress's role to assert their constitutional prerogative. And there are times at which they have done that. Presidents, of course, don't want Congress to do that. Presidents, any president, doesn't matter how, you know, I don't know, how you could reincarnate Jesus and you could have President Jesus, and maybe President Jesus wouldn't do this, but anybody other than President Jesus is a president who is going to accept the power that they have inherited from previous presidents. They're not going to give up power that has accrued to the executive, because once they are in power, they think that they are doing what needs to be done on behalf of the country, and being able to do stuff without anybody else getting in your way, they think is a good thing. Presidents never give up power that they've got. It's got to be asserted by the body with which they compete on national security matters, which is Congress. And Congress has done that from time to time, and they have wussed out from time to time. And right now, we are in a wuss out sort of phase. It does not have to be that way, and there are very recent examples of Congress having behaved in a much more muscular way that I think could very easily be a model for how to reinvent that relationship again in the post-9/11 era. I'll do one more question, and I promise I'll be fast.
I'll be fast too. First, just thank you for getting the Lawrence Lessig of the world. The money out of politics sort of near and dear to me. Get Betty Romer back on. He's really funny. I wouldn't vote for him, but he's very funny. Something that I'm worried about is sort of what things look like moving forward. If Congress is going to be making the decisions in a post-Citizens United world where special interests that are pro-war could easily put up $1 to $2 million that it takes to win a congressional seat. I mean, it's a lot different, you know, the amount of money it takes to win a presidential election, but it doesn't take that much money to win a congressional seat. And I sort of want to understand what war looks like moving forward if we are still in this Citizens United debacle, and they can just sort of buy congressional seats for pro-war congressmen.
Yes, I think there's reason to worry about that as much as there is reason to worry about the corrupting influence of unbridled money in Congress and in all sorts of electoral races. There's as much reason to worry about it in national security as in anything else. However, I do also think, I mean, this is sort of a good news book about a bad news subject. The thing that I think is underappreciated about this as a subject is that this is not particularly partisan. That, yes, there are people who have magnetic yellow ribbons on the bumper of their SUV. And yes, there are people in the bike lane next to them cursing them out for having that stupid magnetic yellow ribbon on the SUV, and that's impotent and self-defeating. But actually, I feel for both of the characters in that, because they both come from the same place, which is that people on the left and people on the right and people with no politics at all are weirded out that we've just had we still have ongoing the longest war in American history, and another 8.5-year-long war in Iraq fought concurrently with that, and 1% of the population fighting those wars. Everybody is unsettled by this. Whether you are pro those wars or anti those wars, everybody is unsettled by it. And to have American families that are civilian families having, you know, we gave ourselves a tax cut, Just before 9/11 happened, we decided to invade Afghanistan, we kept the tax cut. And then when we decided to go to Iraq 2 years later, a few weeks before we went to Iraq, we gave ourselves another multi-trillion-dollar tax cut. Again, really? Those are not the actions of a country that believes it is at war. Military families have endured multiple combat deployments, not just even year-long combat deployments, but in some cases multiple longer than a year combat deployments in the decade since 9/11. Those of us in civilian life have had tax cuts. That is the consequence of these changes that we have gone through politically to make war easier to wage. And it has brought us to a place that nobody in the country is not disgusted by. And I think that these things, I think we can start if we understand what the consequences were of these policy decisions that got us to this place, I think that if there are politicians who are willing to try to dial them back, dialing back contracting, dialing back the secrecy of the way with which we wage war, dialing up congressional muscularity on these issues, some of these other things that I talk about, I think if politicians try to do this, they will find that they are pushing on an open door, that there are Republicans and Democrats and people in the middle and people on both wings that all feel the same way about this. I think this is fixable. Thank you.